Hello, and welcome to the Nurturing Resilience podcast, where me, your host, Leisha Nelson, weaves together the worlds of somatics, science, and energetics to nurture a deeper connection to yourself. This is a podcast that covers a span of topics and ideas, from guest storytelling their rites of passage that catalyzed their resiliency, to nervous system and mind-body health education, to deep contemplation on topics such as cultivating connection to ourselves and others in a complex world. I'm an occupational therapist, somatic practitioner, and body worker, attachment specialist, and baby whisperer, with over 20 years of experience with mind-body connection and supporting matrescence. What you're receiving today and listening today is the uncut version of my podcast. This is where I interview guests and I don't do any editing. You're getting it all in the raw. If you're interested in my podcast, you can find that on Spotify, which is the edited version. And if you're interested in my work, you can follow me on Instagram at Leisha Nilsson, and also through my website at leishanilsson.com. If you enjoy what you hear today, if you enjoy this podcast, please share it on your social media pages with your friends, your family, your loved ones. Let the world know that it's here. If you really like it, you can follow me and write a review. That's how my podcast gets out to listeners like you. And this important information about the body, somatics, and nervous system can find more people that need it. All right, thanks so much, and let's dive in. Okay, so we have Morley Robbins here today with his book, Cure Your Fatigue, and his protocol, The Root Cause Protocol. And I was reviewing your book this morning and found a quote I thought was great to start with that basically might give a little snippet of what root cause protocol is for people that don't know root cause protocol. So basically, the challenge is that 90% of energy and 90% of exhaust is produced from our mitochondria. We can get into what mitochondria is. If the mitochondria are not properly structured, and if electrons are not properly flowing, then they are not going to activate oxygen cleanly and completely, and we're going to get more exhaust buildup, which will leave us, quote unquote, exhausted and eventually more chronically diseased. Preventing this exhaustion is the whole premises of root cause protocol in a nutshell. And who doesn't want to get rid of their exhaustion?
Exactly. Everyone's fatigued. It's the number one reason why we go see the doctor.
Fatigue, disease, issues.
No, it's fatigue.
It's fatigue.
People go, some overwhelming percentage of doctor visits is I'm exhausted, I'm tired. That's what starts the conversation.
So root cause protocol in a nutshell is basically to address why is this fatigue happening and what can we do about it so that we stop all being so fatigued.
Right. And the key is, what can we, the people, do? What can we do as sovereign entities to regulate ourselves, to feed and properly support our metabolism? And that's really important, especially in this so-called modern era, where we're anything but sovereign. But the thing is, there's two recognized paradigms of healing. And we're all very familiar with attack the guest. And that's, we got to get rid of the enemies, right? And the other is strengthen the host. And that's what all the ancient healing paradigms, traditional Chinese medicine, Native American Indian medicine, Ayurvedic medicine, those are all based on strengthening the host, because when the host has energy, it knows exactly what to do. And so we've been raised in a paradigm that our body's stupid, we're not much better, and you need a priest to guide you through this process of healing. And our ancestors never witnessed that. They never had this level of dis-ease. Now we've got 40% of humanity suffering from some form or fashion of metabolic syndrome. Well, what is metabolic syndrome? The body's not making energy. There's a wholesale breakdown in energy production, and when energy is down, uric acid is up. Uric acid is the ultimate exhaust. It's a very toxic form of exhaust inside the cell, and so it becomes a defining moment to understand how is the energy made, and how do we prevent exhaust. We're never going to prevent. I shouldn't say prevent, but how do we minimize exhaust? That's really what we're seeking to do. And so, what our maker and Mother Nature did was take one element and make it in charge of making energy and make it in charge of clearing the exhaust. Now, I'm not sure I would have designed it that way, but that's the way we are designed. And so what you see behind me, of course, is that triangle, right? Mm-hmm. And that's meant to, it has many meanings. One is, it's actually a picture about Egyptian healing. What you can't see, there's a sun at the top, but coming down the sides are a series of ankhs. And that's the religious symbol of the Egyptians. Guess what the ankh was made of?
Copper.
Yeah, brass, exactly. And you would think it was gold, but it's not. It's actually copper. And there's a pecking order. And what's at the top?
Sun.
Yeah, sun's at the top. And guess who has a magnetic attraction to sunlight? Copper. Guess who has a magnetic attraction to the other? So sunlight is the beginning of life, photosynthesis, right? That's where it all starts. Photons stimulating the plants to produce things that we can eat, right? And what's the other end of life? Is ammonia. Guess who has a magnetic attraction to ammonia? Copper.
Oh, wow. Wow.
And it's like, and I'm learning this from he's a 40-year veteran of naturopathy and chiropractic in Australia, but he's been studying copper and iron for 30 years as an alchemist.
Wow.
And it's absolutely mind-blowing what this guy knows. He's just such a font of wisdom. And he's a couple of years older than me, and it's just like I'm like a little boy sitting at his knee, like, what else? What else? So it's absolutely fascinating. And see, all of this wisdom is lost to the ages. I was giving a talk last summer. Dr. Liz and I were in the Dallas area talking about my book, hawking my wares. And the neighbor to the couple who had hosted us, she came up to me after the meeting. And she said, Morley, I don't know anything about copper or anything. She says, but my dad was a physician. But his hobby was studying Native American Indian medicine. He was obsessed with it. And she said, do you know what it was based upon? I said, I have no idea, but I can't wait to find out. Copper.
Wow.
And so then you think about, okay, let's go into the Indian culture. Who are the three sisters in the Indian culture?
Beans.
Beans.
Corn.
Squash. Right. And what were the meats that they ate?
Bison.
Bison, thank you.
Fish.
And deer.
Deer.
They're all really important sources of what?
Copper. And they would eat the whole animal.
Of course they would. And so the French are the ones who invented barbecue, right? Do you know what it stands for?
No.
The French word for nose is B-A-R-B-E, barbie. Q is the tail. Q-U-E is tail. Nose to tail. Barbecue is nose to tail eating.
Which we've lost.
And what have we turned barbecue into? A big sugar glycated mess with sauces, and it's not what our ancestors used to get all of the food, the proteins, the fats, the connective tissue. I mean, all that was so important.
So we've talked a lot about copper. And so tell me a little bit of the dynamics of, because we've been told that copper's bad. Like, don't take copper. You need to go on a copper detox.
Right.
Like, we've been told. I was raised that way. And so what's happening with copper? What is copper doing in our body, and why is that so important?
Why is copper important, right? And we've got a couple days to talk about this. Is that right?
I mean, you do have a whole book, but
Yeah.
I told Morley before we started recording that I had to read it twice to like really understand it. But that's how my brain works. I don't want to just kind of understand things. I really want to embody and understand things.
And what I told Leisha was, I love that kind of passion, to really understand it, to internalize it, so you can talk about it and feel comfortable about it. Let's go back to what might be a fun place to do is start it at the beginning, before oxygen was on the planet. And somehow astrobiologists know this stuff. And I'm not here to argue, how long was the day, how long was the year, but there was a time period, according to these scientists, when there was no oxygen. And then 3.4 billion years ago, how could they be that precise? But they are. And so allegedly there were cyanobacteria, that means blue bacteria, blue-green algae, you've heard of it, right? They're really important, but what did they decide to do? They decided to play with that orb up in the sky and started to take the photons and do something with it. Now, what a lot of people don't know is, well, how does photosynthesis really work? I mean, it's really cool. I mean, there's actually 3 enzymes. There's photosystem 2 that captures the photons, and then it goes through something called plastocyanin, which moves the electrons over to photosystem 1, and voila, we make energy, and we release oxygen. It's absolutely amazing. Why does 2 come before 1? Because 1 was discovered before 2, but sequencing, it's 2 plastocyanin and 1. And what is plastocyanin? It's another way of saying copper enzymes. And so the protein that you read about 1,000 times in that book, that I had to pronounce about 1,000 times, is ceruloplasmin. And when I was doing the audible version of the book, I started to get tired of saying it. So I started saying ceruloplasm, and the engineer was a riot. He said, "No, you got to redo it." I said, "It's my book. I'll say it any way I want." He says, "No, I'm not going to let you do that." So ceruloplasmin has 8 plastocyanin enzymes in it. It's a big deal, folks. It goes back to the beginning of time. And what happened was, these cyanobacteria started to release oxygen into the primordial sea. It was methane and sulfur and iron. And then as the sea began to fill, then oxygen started to go into the atmosphere. And when 0.1% of oxygen was in the atmosphere, 99% of life ceased to exist on the planet. It's called the Great Oxygen Event. People can read about it. And what saved us, what saved life on the planet, what allowed for higher life forms on the planet, is this element called copper. And what it did was 3 molecules, or three chemicals, emerged from that primordial sea. One was, they're called multi-copper oxidases. And these enzymes turn oxygen, which is O2, the molecule of oxygen was O2, turns oxygen into 2 molecules of water, 2H2O. Most important chemical transaction on planet Earth, turning this poison oxygen into water inside our body. And we now have an atmosphere that has 21% oxygen. It's not 1/10 of 1%, it's 21%. So multi-copper oxidases. Second is something called melatonin. It wasn't a sleep aid back then. It's the master antioxidant enzyme inside the mitochondria. It's incredibly important. So master antioxidant in the mitochondria, melatonin, master antioxidant inside the cell, glutathione, master antioxidant inside our body and blood. It's called ceruloplasmin. So melatonin, very, very important chemical. Then the third element that showed up way back in time, it's called cholesterol. You've heard of it, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's like, it doesn't cause disease. It shows up when you're not able to metabolize oxygen.
Mm.
So if you want to metabolize oxygen on planet Earth, you better have copper and copper enzymes. And back in 1973, when Big Pharma was cranking up their statin engine, a physician named Leslie Clavet, MD, PhD, what did he know? I mean, just an average guy, gets his medical degree at University of South Dakota and gets his doctorate at a little school in Boston called Harvard. But what does he know? But he was pointing out to the world that when copper becomes deficient, cholesterol rises. Why is that? Because it takes 11 molecules of oxygen to make 1 molecule of cholesterol. What is cholesterol? It's an oxygen sink. Mm. It's a way to protect the body from rising oxygen levels. So what caused all the chaos? It was the iron filings that they were putting in our wheat flour in 1941, increased it 50% in 1969. And what did the iron do? It oxidized the oxygen in the cholesterol to make it destructive. And then they blamed cholesterol for the problem, but never told us about the iron.
Wow. Or the importance of copper.
Or the importance of copper. No, it's exactly right. And so why is copper important? It only does a few things. It creates energy. It clears exhaust. It catalyzes enzymes. The most important enzyme, I think, I mean, there's some blockbuster enzymes that copper is responsible for, but the one we were chatting about briefly before we got started is called the PAM enzyme, PAM. And what does that stand for? It's a word this big called peptidoglycine alpha amidating monooxygenase. What did he just say?
No wonder we call it PAM.
No wonder we call it PAM. And I get $1 every time I say it. So I will say it frequently during our conversation. But the thing is, what people don't realize is, what does the PAM enzyme do? It does everything in the body. We're run by hormones, by chemical messengers. It's called peptide signaling. Peptide signaling goes back to ancient cilia. It goes back to the beginning of time. And so catalyzes enzymes. And there's only 9 that copper's recognized as being essential for, but they're all over the body. And then the fourth thing that copper does, so we got create energy, clear exhaust, catalyze enzymes, combat enemies. All enemies, bacteria, fungus, virus, and parasites, all cave in the presence of copper. What was the one word they didn't use between 2020 and 2021? There's no mention of copper. And so I renamed that era. COV stands for copper's vanished, and ID stands for ions dysregulated.
I love it.
And if you see, they can't imagine that this toxic element, copper, could in any way have any relationship over iron. And so what is important to know is that the Chinese, what do they know? They've only been around for 5,000 years. So they refer to copper as the general and iron as the foot soldier. You don't have to be in the military to understand the difference between a general and a foot soldier, right? But if you want a really graphic image, try to picture the Battle of the Bulge without Patton. Would have been a very different outcome. And what's amazing about Patton is he moved 200 tanks and 200,000 men in 2 days. And one of the more celebrated pictures is of him directing traffic to make it happen.
Yeah.
Generals cause things to happen. And so people don't understand how the body works. And what we've been trained to believe is that copper is toxic and that we're anemic. You're anemic and you're copper toxic. It's the meme. It's the absolute meme. Right. Okay. It's the meme that runs medicine on this planet.
Yeah. I was told I was anemic. That's how I got into this.
Okay. There you go. Well, we'll dig into that. And so the thing is, what you need to understand is that iron is the number one element on planet Earth. 36% of the Earth's composition is iron. That's a lot. And before 2020, I was convinced that humans were the most evolved species. Now I'm not so sure. But in order to believe that iron's anemic and copper's toxic, what you have to understand is that what it means is if you were in fact anemic, it means that the most evolved species on the planet has lost the ability to metabolize the number one element on the planet. Makes no sense. Does not pass the sniff test. And what people don't know, what they have no awareness of, is that the metrics around iron are with this implicit understanding that it's a dipstick function. Let me check your iron status, right? Like it's like oil in the car, when in fact iron status is miles per gallon. It involves multiple variables. To get to miles per gallon, you got to know, is the timing right? Am I getting the right fuel? Are my tires the right pressure? Am I driving safely? There are a lot of variables that go into miles per gallon. And you can fill up your car with gasoline and it won't improve miles per gallon. But people don't realize that. So what we've been taught is that, we need more iron. And so we've been chatting for about 15, 20 minutes. And this is a good statistic for your listeners. Every second of every day, we need to replace 2.5 million red blood cells. Every second.
Wow.
So 20 minutes times 60 times 2.5 million. It's a big number, right? In 24 hours, we have to replace 2 trillion red blood cells. Now, here's what will surprise you, is that it takes 25 milligrams. If you want to get really technical, it's 24.4, according to a famous hematologist named Max Weintraub. What did he know? He wrote the first textbook in hematology in 1941. But what does he know, right? And so 25 milligrams of iron to replace 2 trillion red blood cells. 25 milligrams. The average woman is supposed to have 4,000 milligrams of iron. The average guy, 5,000. And so 25 milligrams is nothing. 25 of 4,000? It's a little tiny bit. But here's the part that will really stun you and your listeners. 24 of those 25 milligrams comes from an iron recycling system that is directed by copper.
Mm. And when you say iron recycling system, you mean it's coming from our own body?
Absolutely. It's the formal name for it is reticuloendothelial system. It's called the RES. It took me 2 years to understand that meant recycling. And so reticuloendothelial system is a primal, ancient, conserved process of replacing red blood cells that last how long? 120 days. Who figured that out? Oh yeah, that Max Weintraub guy. What did he know? He got lucky, And he's the guy that figured out MCH and MCHC and MCV and RDW, our red blood cell distribution width. He's the guy who figured all this out. And what's fascinating is he gets his medical degree in Canada, gets a PhD in physiology from Tulane University in Louisiana, goes to Hopkins, starts to flex his muscles about what he understands, and then they find out he's Jewish. Guess where he ends up? University of Utah Medical Center.
No way.
Absolutely. Way. And he was the first chief of medicine and directed the medical school at the University of Utah in your backyard.
Well, there we go. Literally. It's not that far from me.
Yeah. And so people don't know who Max Weintraub is, but he was an absolute genius. And he recruited an elite team of physician scientists. George Cartwright took his place after he died. You can look up the research of George Cartwright, and your jaw's going to drop. And there's Lee and Williams and all these famous clinicians who they only did 33 experiments with copper and human metabolism to prove that copper was the general and iron was the foot soldier. Now, where is all that research stored? With the Ark of the Covenant in the warehouse from the movie Raiders of the Lost Ark. It's all. I'm sure if you go into the lost hallways of University of Utah Library, they'll have it somewhere. But this is unbelievable research from the 1950s to the early 80s. They dominated the understanding of copper and iron metabolism. So all of that knowledge is it's gone. And so what we're led to believe is that, copper's important, but it's toxic too. Copper's important, but it's toxic too. And where does that toxic thing come from? A guy named Carl Pfeiffer, Carl C. Pfeiffer, a PhD with an MD. It's important to know which degree came first. It means he didn't get into medical school right away, did he? And so he wrote a very important book called Mental and Elemental Nutrients in 1968. And in that book is an article about copper and ceruloplasmin. And the article talks about when copper becomes unbound from its protein. And that happens under certain conditions of stress, like being exposed to ascorbic acid, antibiotics, too much sugar, hormone replacement therapy, and so on and so forth. There are a lot of things in our environment that will cause the ceruloplasmin protein to blow up, and the copper comes out. It is unbound from its protein, and then it became unbound, just unbound copper. And then
it caused issues.
And then it became copper toxic. And so it was an iteration of a term. And it turns out that as soon as copper comes out of ceruloplasmin, it gets bound to albumin, histidine, transcuprine. There's some binding agent. And the amount of unbound copper There's a famous team of copper experts headed up by Svetlana Lutsenko at Hopkins, a famous Russian trained copper expert. And the term is called zeptomolar. And what zeptomolar means is that there's 21 zeros before we get to the 0.1 chance of a copper being unbound inside the body.
Mm.
There's virtually no unbound copper. The whole thing is a bait and switch. When copper is not bioavailable, iron becomes dysregulated. And all the symptoms that people have been trained to be afraid of are from iron, not from copper.
So to recap, just really quick, make sure I'm understanding you correctly. And also, because it took me a while to understand that ceruloplasmin was the quote unquote taxi, or what carries the copper.
Right.
And it transports it around the body to where it needs to go.
Right.
And then it gets put into the different parts of the body where it's needed.
Exactly.
So it's not like we have copper just floating around our body.
No.
We have this very important protein, ceruloplasmin, which is making the copper bioavailable. That's what bioavailable means, correct? Is that it becomes available for our organs.
Exactly. And what also makes it bioavailable, your understanding is absolutely correct, Alicia. What makes it bioavailable is the copper is in the enzymes that allow it to express its intelligence. And what's important for people to know is that many of these copper enzymes, there's two ways to measure enzyme status. You can measure its level, which is akin to someone's height, or you can measure its activity, which is an indication of its intelligence, its IQ. So how tall are you, Alicia?
5'5".
Okay. Does that in any way tell us what your IQ is?
Hope not.
I hope not, right? Well, I'm 6 feet, so I must be smarter, right? Because I'm taller, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's the game that science plays, is that they will get a yardstick out and tell you how tall this enzyme is, the ceruloplasmin enzyme or the PAM enzyme or whatever. But they're expressly prohibited by the Food and Drug Administration to measure the activity level, the IQ. There's the rub. They don't want us to know the intelligence of our copper enzymes. And to my knowledge, this is the only mineral that's measured two different ways, level and IQ. And so the whole aura of the narrative around copper is based on level and it being, quote, unbound. And if you don't know better, you'll believe that. Mm-hmm. And so it's the overriding meme. You're anemic and you're copper toxic. And the truth is, as you read in the book twice, the truth is just the opposite. Your iron is stuck in your tissue. The recycling program's not working right because there's a very important doorway in the recycling macrophages. Those are the Pac-Men that gobble up the iron, the dying red blood cells. They gobble them up and they break down the red blood cell, and they are supposed to be able to release iron out a back door called ferroportin, iron doorway, ferroportin, iron doorway. But here's the most important part. There's a copper dorman that opens up that back door. Mm-hmm. And if the copper dorman is not there, iron can't get out, can't get back to transferrin, can't be stored properly in ferritin. And then we have the illusion of an iron problem, but it's all caused by COV. Copper's vanished. And if anyone has any doubt about what myocarditis is about, first of all, any word that ends in ITIS means it's the iron seeker That's what ITIS. Any word that ends in OSIS, oxidative stress is severe. It's good to know those.
Mhm.
And what is also important, I was talking about Leslie Clave before, Dr. Clave. Well, in 2002, he wrote a very important article about the fact that there are 80 anatomical, chemical, and physiological defects in a copper deficient heart.
Mhm.
So when elite athletes are collapsing to the ground from myocarditis, there's only one reason why.
Not enough copper.
And the iron is raging in the body.
Right. And if that copper iron isn't there to open the door and have that change happen, is that how iron's getting stored in the tissue?
Exactly
Because
how.
there's two things happening with iron that you may have mentioned already, maybe not, but that there's iron in the blood and there's iron in the tissue.
Absolutely.
And what
Measured.
doctors are testing is the iron in the blood,
Right.
which is
Exactly.
how I got told I was anemic.
Which marker? There's three typical markers for iron. There's hemoglobin, there's ferritin, and there's something called serum iron. Let's break those down real quick.
Yeah.
So hemoglobin it's the biggest concentration of iron in the body. It's a bucket. It's 70% of the iron is tied up in hemoglobin. So that's a bucket of iron. Then there's a teacup. There's a difference between a teacup and a bucket, right? There's a teacup of iron called serum ferritin. It's actually, I shouldn't use it. It's called ferritin. And ferritin is supposed to be inside the cell. It's not supposed to be in the blood, which is outside the cell. So serum ferritin is a very gross misnomer. But in any event, about 10% of iron in the body is in ferritin. And then there's a little thimble of iron called serum iron. Sometimes it's called total iron. And that is the iron that's available for the recycling program. So it's a very small percentage of iron, but it has massive implications for the recycling system. And in a healthy woman's body, serum iron should be about 100, and in a man's body, it should be about 120. The lower it is, the less efficient, the more stuck the iron is in the tissue, as you say. And that's the part that doctors don't seem to understand. And this whole idea of iron in the blood versus iron in the tissue is the work of a famous team, Bruce Ames and David Kalilia. They were at UC Berkeley for many, many years. And they were measuring iron status. And they realized in 2004 that iron in the tissue can be 10 times iron in the blood. And
Wow.
that's where the confusion is the blood test only measures iron in the blood. To get to iron in the tissue, you'd have to do a needle biopsy of your liver. It's very painful, you first. Or you can do a Tesla 2 MRI. It's very expensive. Again, you first. But those are the two definitive ways of getting to tissue level iron as opposed to this misnomer of blood level, because the blood is not representative of the tissue.
Mhm.
Does that make sense?
It does. So what do you do? Because this is what so many, I mean, my sister is going through this currently. She's not ready for this information yet. I went through this. So many pregnant women I know, they go to the doctor. Oh, you're anemic. You got to take iron pills, which I know now you actually need to be working on your copper. But it's like, what do we do when we get told that, or how do we figure this out?
Great question. So, um, Have you been pregnant?
No,
Okay. And has your sister been pregnant?
twice.
Okay. Is she older or younger?
18 months older.
Okay. And were there other children in the family?
There's four of us.
And where are you in the pecking order?
The youngest.
All right, so you're the baby. Okay. You're the caboose, right?
Mhm.
Mom and dad saved the best for last, right? Right?
Maybe I kind of showed up when they weren't ready.
Okay. All right. Happens a lot. So,
Yeah.
but the thing is, what your listeners need to know is that when a woman is carrying a baby, she shouldn't be worrying about iron and vitamin D. She better be worrying about copper and retinol and magnesium. Those would be the big three: magnesium, copper, and retinol. Why? Because that's what the developing fetus's brain is based upon. And so what happens? There's 3 trimesters, right? But in the 3rd trimester, there's a very, very, very important download of copper between mother and child. So adults, we have about 100 milligrams of copper in our body. That's nothing. 100 milligrams? Are you kidding me? That fits on the head of a 1-inch stick pin. It's a little tiny bit of copper, but it's a general, right? And what's iron? Between 4 and 5,000 milligrams. It's like 50 to 1 ratio. It's ridiculous. And so here's the part that's really, really important. 70% of your copper is transferred from the mother's liver to the fetus's liver in the 3rd trimester. 70 milligrams of copper. And that copper in the fetus and the retinol in the breast milk form the backbone of the immune system for the baby in the first 2 years of life. Very important to know that. And in the modern era, most women don't have enough copper for the first baby, much less the second, the third, or the caboose, right? And so your sister has given birth twice. She didn't have enough copper for the first one. Now she's done it again. And the bookends of stress on planet Earth, guys in foxholes worrying about life. Instead of worrying about death, guys in foxholes worrying about death, and women in birthing suites worrying about life. Those are the bookends of stress. There's no greater stress than those 2 events. And when you're in that kind of a stressful situation, you're losing tons and tons of magnesium, tons and tons of copper to the chronic stress. And so copper is down, and your sister's practitioner doesn't know that copper is the general, doesn't know that the iron recycling system is dependent upon a copper dormant. And so what's really funny about this is when I was in college, I wanted to be a doctor.
Me too.
Yeah. Well, my mom and dad were very sickly people in and out of the hospital. My older sister, became a nurse. So I was supposed to become the doctor, right? Until you get to college and you go, oh my God, this is heavy stuff. And so the people, my classmates, 100% of the classmates that got into medical school all got an A in calculus. It's true. And now they've been reduced to monkeys with a ruler, measuring iron level, but not the sophistication of the reticuloendothelial system. And so the reticuloendothelial system is akin to calculus. One of the most important functions in the human body is the recycling of iron every 24 hours. It's a big friggin' deal. And there's this much awareness of it. And so your sister I guarantee. Do you know which of the three markers she's low in, or is it all three? Do you know?
I didn't ask her, and now too, I'm somewhere I have my blood test results. I'm gonna go pull them up after this call.
Yeah, and then see that would be a good thing for us to talk about in another conversation, so people could get down to the precision, because um, if you're involved in pregnancy, the only marker that matters is hemoglobin.
Mm.
And here's the part that people don't realize, that in a woman who's not pregnant, hemoglobin should be between 12.5 and 13.5. That's considered healthy hemoglobin for a non-pregnant woman. As the pregnancy progresses, in the second half of the pregnancy, hemoglobin level drops. And this is the wisdom of Mother Nature at her finest. And there's a famous study done in 1995 by Philip Steers, famous British OB. And Leisha, he studied 150,000 live births. I would have been impressed if he'd done 150, but he did 150,000 live births, and he correlated what is the mother's hemoglobin level to the healthiest babies.
Oh, wow.
Really, two important indices, right?
Yeah,
And
brilliant.
what he discovered was that the healthiest babies, bar none, were born to women whose hemoglobin was between 8.5 and 9.5. Now, in the modern era, birthing practitioners are taught that if the hemoglobin gets below 12, get anxious.
Put them on
If it,
iron.
and if it gets below 10, get apoplectic.
Mm.
Insist on an infusion. And so, where did Dr. Steers find the best babies, healthiest babies? 8.5 to 9.5. And again, we have to come back to the era that we're in. This, do you know the book 1984?
Mm-mm.
You don't know that book. Okay. It's a very important book. You might want to read it. You can read it in a weekend. It's a very quick read. But what's important about it is that the book was written in 1948. So 1948 from 1984 is 36. What happens when you add 36 to 1984? You get 2020.
Mm.
And what 2020 represents is the activation of the totalitarian state that is laid out in that book called 1984.
I did hear about this book during COVID time.
Right. And
Yeah.
so the theme of that book is that black becomes white, white becomes black, and citizens become enemies of the state.
Mm.
That's what we're living now, is the activation, or if I wanted to be really clinical about it, the alpha amidation of 1984. And if you don't know that, then you don't understand what we're up against. And if you don't realize that everything is the exact opposite of what it's supposed to be. And so what are they pushing? Iron and vitamin D.
Mhm.
What's the truth? Copper and retinol.
Yeah.
The exact opposite. And it takes a very nimble mind and a very courageous heart to be willing to say, oh, they want me to go left. I think I better go right. And so um, for Mother's Day, my wife and I went to see a really cool movie. What it had to do with Mother's Day, I don't know what it was, but it was The Wizard of Oz. It's a
Yeah.
great movie. I had never seen it on a big screen.
Oh, well, yeah.
Oh, it was unbelievable. It was such a different, I'm 70 years old. I've never seen The Wizard of Oz on the big screen. And so there's a big talking head, right?
Mhm.
Who's the talking head in the modern era? It's called the internet.
Mm.
The people don't realize that.
Mhm.
And what's one of the critical scenes in the movie? When the little dog Toto pulls back the green curtain and reveals that the snake oil salesman is moving the levers, and well,
Mhm.
guess who Toto is? That's me. I'm Toto pulling back the curtain on the system. And,
Right.
and so the thing is, people need to realize that that the it's really simple. And that's what the book is about, is to explain how the body really works. Not all this mumbo jumbo about disease. It's all about energy. It's not about enemies. The phrase I use now is ignore the enemies, ignite the energy. That's really what it's about. And so back to your sister who's gotten this label. Now she's anemic, but it's important to know which of those three variables is it. And if it's low hemoglobin, it means something. If it's low ferritin, it means something else. And if it's low serum iron, it means something yet again. And the only one that matters if she's pregnant or has been pregnant is hemoglobin. And if it's low because she has low copper in her post-baby body.
And it doesn't matter that she's 8 years out.
What do you mean? The babies were 8 years ago?
No, yeah, like she had a baby 8 years ago.
Okay. Well, she hasn't recovered.
Yeah, she's in depletion. And she's high stress, low magnesium, the whole.
Does she
the
work
whole
outside the home?
Not since COVID, but she used to.
Okay. So did she get COVID?
Yeah.
Okay. So copper's vanished, iron's dysregulated.
Mm.
And I mean, we'll never really know what COVID was. But what I can tell you is that this I just learned this the other day, that copper deficient red blood cells develop spikes on them. Like, what?
Mm.
And it's like, it's mind blowing. But in any event, to the extent that your sister or other people that you know, like your sister, are open to it, the whole purpose of the root cause protocol is there's a series of stops, as you know. Stop taking the narrative supplements. You don't need vitamin D, you don't need iron, you don't need zinc, and so on. And start to focus on the phases of these other supplements and see what happens. So I've got clients all over the world, as you can imagine, but I have this one client. He's 87 years old. And I'd done 2 consults with him. And he was complaining of fatigue, of course, some other things. And after two blood tests, I had an idea of where his copper was, and it was hovering around 100, but his ceruloplasmin wasn't right. And I said, why don't you just take one of my capsules of Recuperate and just see what it does for you? He said, great, I'll do it. Again, he's 87 years old. So I get his blood work back in January of this year for a consult in February. And Leisha, his copper is 205. I'm like, oh my God, what's going on? So he gets on the call on the bridge, and I said, I was looking at your blood work, and I couldn't help but notice that your copper is a little elevated. And he leans in and he goes, I know, isn't that exciting? And I said, I'm just curious. What did you do? He said, well, Morley, you told me 2 things. You said, 1, I'm in charge. And 2, you told me to take 1 Recuperate. Well, I decided to take 6.
Oh my God.
So instead of getting 2 milligrams of copper, he was getting 12 milligrams of copper.
Wow.
And so I tried to keep my composure, and I said, what have you noticed? Again, he leans into the camera and he said, well, Morley, all of my fatigue issues, my muscle issues, my memory issues, and my sleep issues are all gone. And that was with just 8 weeks of supplements.
Wow. And supplements, you mean your
Recuperate.
copper?
Yeah, and he was doing the protocol in general, but he was bolstering it with the Recuperate. And it's like, I went, that's pretty cool. He says, I know. And again, I really do believe in this. The object of that book and of that protocol is to democratize healing, to allow anyone who's willing to buck the narrative, anyone who's willing to embrace Mother Nature and begin to remineralize their body. And as you've highlighted, the important thing is to make the copper bioavailable. Make sure that it's in the proteins that it needs to be in the enzymes that it needs to be in. And there is a wisdom to our body. And the whole notion of innate healing, innate wisdom, I am absolutely certain is based on the bioavailability of copper. And in the modern era, it's treated as a toxin, which tells us that that is the truth, that copper is in fact the ultimate, the penultimate healer in our body.
Mm. Well, and I think it's important to name, and I want to honor your time too. I'm watching the clock here, and I think it's
I'm good.
important to name if people are listening and they're like, "Oh, this is me." Don't just run out and take a bunch of copper.
Right. Right. No, I know, and I thank you for stressing that. This isn't just start popping copper supplements, but this
Right.
is take the time to get the book or listen to the book. It's an Audible. What I've learned from a number of people is that the people seem to appreciate it the most when they're reading it and listening to it at the same time. It really sinks in. That's good to know. But there's over 200 podcasts out there. There's 81 posts on iron toxicity in the rcp123.org website. And so there's a lot of information, and each of those posts has at least 4 to 6 scientific articles supporting its premise. And I think there's 5 or 6 articles that lead with the headline, "You're Not Anemic." And I'm talking about different facets of it. And so the thing is, people, if they keep doing what the big talking head tells them, and if they keep doing what their doctor tells them and they're not getting better, well, that's a good time to try Mother Nature and allow Mother Nature's wisdom to come through, especially if you're pregnant. Especially
Especially if you're pregnant. And also, you've mentioned another really important mechanism in this, which is retinol, which we get from animals. And I was vegan for years.
Okay, right.
I'm a recovering vegan.
That's okay. No, I think that means kudos to you for having the willingness to even hear the other side. And again, what was engineered out of our diet back in the 50s? It's called fat. President Eisenhower in 1955, if you want to get technical, September 24th of 1955, he's playing golf and he has a heart attack. Well, the whole country had a heart attack when he was the supreme leader. He was the supreme Allied commander, and he had a heart attack? Are you kidding me? And so what happened? Ansel Keys, famous physiologist, seized the moment and put everyone on a fat-free diet to get rid of cholesterol, right? We all know that. But what's connected to cholesterol? Retinol.
Yeah.
What people didn't realize is that by eliminating fat, by eliminating cholesterol, we were eliminating retinol, which is the obligate nutrient to activate the copper pumps to put copper into its enzymes. If you don't have those copper pumps, you don't got no copper enzymes. And then we're in a world of hurt. And the enzyme that I was talking about at the beginning, this PAM enzyme, when I first read about it was in 2010. So that's a while back. And it was a book on leptin resistance.
I'm hearing more and more about leptin resistance.
Right. So you have insulin resistance, leptin resistance, adrenaline resistance, cortisol resistance, and so on. And it's important to know why Why is there this resistance? The body's not demonic, right? And so we'll stay with a fun number, because what I was sharing with Leisha before the program is I found an article that talks about over 800 peptides needing to be activated. Well, that's a number we can't relate to that. So that's like, I'm having trouble getting past 3. And so the thing is that there's a famous husband and wife team, Richard Maines and Betty Eiper, did research at Hopkins for 20 years, and then went to UConn Medical Center, University of Connecticut Medical Center. They've been there for another 20 years. But these are the supreme experts on the PAM enzyme on the planet. And they published a very important article in 2012 called The Neuropeptides. And in that article, they identified 43 neuropeptides. Okay, that's a number I can relate to. 43, that's something I can get my hands around, get my brain around. But what's important for people to realize is that in those 43 are blockbuster hormones. Insulin, glucagon, TRH, TSH, people with thyroid issues. They don't realize that these hormones need to be activated. Digestive issues, gastrin, secretin, CCK, cholecystokinin. Cholecystokinin is critical for breaking down fats, not just in the gut. It has its highest expression in the brain. Who knew, right?
Oh, wow.
If cholecystokinin is not right, guess what you get? Neurodegeneration. All forms of neurodegeneration, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, ALS, Huntington's, all have correlation to low action by the PAM enzyme, especially CCK. That's a game changer.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk about something we all know about. We know about insulin, and we know about insulin resistance.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really important when you're pregnant. You're worried about, you don't want to get gestational diabetes, right?
Yeah.
Don't get me started. So
I'm like, let's have you come back and we'll just talk about gestational
no,
diabetes.
you should, because it's really, really important. Because what's really important is playing in the background in pregnancy is called uric acid.
Mm.
And people don't know
Yeah.
that.
And I'm passionate about gestational diabetes because then they induce pregnancy if you have gestational diabetes. And I am pro, let's stop inducing all of these pregnancies.
Because another peptide for us to talk about next time is called oxytocin. You've heard of it, right?
Yeah, I'm reading that new book called Oxytocin. It's blowing my mind.
Okay. Well, I'll save that for the next conversation, because I've got the backstory that your cranium will absolutely explode when you hear it. But the thing is, let's just stay with insulin. Insulin's really important. We know that. Turns out did you know it's anti-inflammatory? That's its real job. It's billed as get rid of the sugar. It's trying to lower the inflammation. That's why? Because glucose is very inflammatory. Why is glucose inflammatory? Because it likes to hang out with something called iron.
Oh.
But the thing is, insulin is regulated by another hormone. Insulin's coming from the liver. The other hormone's coming from the pancreas. And it's called incretin. Sometimes it's called incretin. It's also called GLP-1. It's a very popular chemical right now. A lot of people with weight loss programs are using GLP-1. Well, what is GLP-1? Well, it's got to be activated by the PAM enzyme. And when it's activated, it can help to release insulin. It directs the release of insulin. And insulin then needs to be activated, right? It doesn't work Unless it gets. So what does this mean? Well, you keep using this word activation, Morley. What does that mean? Well, you have receptors, then you have the hormone comes in, and it needs to be a secure connection to have proper function. Very, very important. And what does alpha amidation mean? It means it's cutting off a glycine residue, glycine amino acid, taking the glycine off and replacing it with an amine group, an NH2. And when NH2 is put on that hormone, it gets activated. But what that really means is it becomes hydrophobic, it resists water, and it makes sure that the connection is absolutely secure. Because what is a hormone? It's a signaling peptide. It's got a job to do. It's got to download information. Cannot download information if it's not in a secure docking station. So what is insecure docking station called? Insulin resistance. Now, if I were to give you a toy that required a battery, and I forgot to give you the battery, after a while, you'd stop playing with the toy. And if we went clinical, we would call that Leisha is suffering from playtime resistance. Right? But when I give you the battery and you put it in the toy, voila, you are playing with the toy. And your resistance has gone away. Well, insulin works the exact same way. GLP-1 works the exact same way. Oxytocin works the exact same way. And no one told us this.
And all of these are done with the PAM enzyme, which are activated by copper.
By copper. It is absolutely amazing. Takes 2 copper. Takes 2 copper batteries. Got to have a ascorbate. It's different than ascorbic acid. Ascorbate has oxygens that are exposed. So ascorbate and oxygen and copper are the 3 prerequisites to activate hormones. So the body makes them in what's called it's very technical, but it's called a pre-pro hormone state. Then it's changed into a pro-hormone state, and then it's changed into an activated hormone state. And it's the PAM enzyme that turns the pro-hormone into the active hormone. And where is the expression of PAM enzyme particularly critical? It's called the placenta. And what your listeners would be fascinated to learn, and we'll talk about it in a subsequent conversation, there's 3 different copper enzymes. There's one enzyme, but it's 3 different proteins that are being expressed in the placenta. What they've never been told is that ceruloplasmin is there. There's a protein called hephaestin. And there's a third protein called zyklopene. Zyklopen. And these 3 proteins are regulating the movement of copper and iron between the mom and the fetus, back and forth. Critical communication between the mom and the fetus. And again, in that 3rd trimester, this download of copper needing to go into the fetus's liver is of paramount importance. And it's very hard to do that when the mom is worrying about iron and vitamin D.
And if she doesn't have enough copper to begin with, her body's going to take it to give to the baby, and then that's why we get so much depletion in postpartum.
Exactly. The mom will get depressed. The mom will have digestive issues. The mom will have all sorts of metabolic issues. She won't. What's a classic sign of a woman with low oxytocin expression?
Depression.
She gains weight. She doesn't lose the weight that she gained to support the baby, she doesn't shrink back to her original size. And giving her a couple squirts of Pitocin in the delivery suite is not going to do it.
No, it makes it worse.
It makes it worse, right? So it's just, and again, I'm going to save the punchline for the next conversation, because I think your listeners are going to go absolutely insane when they find out, when did Big Pharma know how to control these peptides? And they started with oxytocin. We're going to start there.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Well, to wrap up for today, I feel like today was like all about copper. Don't take iron and vitamin D supplements, because that just gets rid of your copper, depletes your copper, does not help you.
Weakens the copper.
Weakens the copper. And it's, if you're interested in, so say someone's listening to this podcast and they're like, well, how do I work with either you? I mean, you have a whole education system, a whole school where you can become a protocol practitioner.
That's right. Yep. And
So
there's a directory. There's a directory on, and again, the website is rcp123.org. Go to the resources tab. Resources will tell you about the practitioners. There's a new class that's starting up in second week in July for the Institute. It's a 16-week program, and people absolutely love it. It seems to draw two types of people, individuals and practitioners. Individuals to learn better how to take care of themselves. Practitioners learn how the body really works, and then incorporate that into their training. And it's very exciting. And then there are people that become practitioners. They're so inspired by this, they want to go out on their own and help guide people, just like a doula does, or a lactation consultant. Well, there's RCPC consultants who do that. And the important thing is, this is not rocket science. There's some big terms, big words, but the concepts are very straightforward. And I think what you have to do is understand both the simplicity and the enormity of what copper is able to do. It's a very humble little mineral, but it has absolute sway in the body, and it's been very artfully overlooked in the formal training of practitioners.
Yeah. And as we've mentioned, you also have your book called Cure Your Fatigue on Audible, and you can purchase that off Amazon.
Absolutely.
It's a great place to start. And I've been to your resource page. I've been to the website a lot. There's so much information there. And also people can Google your name, and like you said, 80 podcasts will come up.
Yeah. Easily. I know there's one site that has like 200, but I'm like, where did they find these things? I mean, I've been doing this now for about 6 years, and it's just, you'll get a kick out of this. So about halfway through writing the book, and I was sending there's a guest writer. His name is Larry Trivieri. He did a great job. And that halfway through the book, I said, so Larry, I've been sending you a bunch of information. Are you finding that helpful? And he said, well, Morley, don't take offense. He said, you're a lousy writer. He said, but I've discovered your podcasts. He said, you have a gift of gab. He said, what I've done is I've transcribed your podcasts. That's what's writing the book. And I went, that's fine. I don't care. And so, when I have these types of conversations, Leisha, it's almost like an out-of-body experience. It's like I feel like the Charlie McCarthy. I'm like a talking head, and someone else is guiding what I say, and I'm just sharing the wisdom that I'm aware of, so that others can benefit from it. And it's a really it's a very humbling moment. I mean, I'm blessed to be able to do my life's work and be able to share it with people like yourself and your followers. But it's absolutely mind-blowing, the ripple effect that it has throughout the community.
Yeah. It's made a difference for me in my life. And so thank you for coming on today. And I will put all your links below in the show notes, and super excited to continue the conversation in pregnancy next time.
Absolutely. Look forward to it.